For joining. I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:36. This is Mark Howell. This is the March 31st meeting of the Fiber Broadband Completion Task Force, and we're going to start with a meeting virtually on Zoom, and we'll start with a roll call. Gordon Brockway.
Present.
Scott Hopkinson.
Present.
David Hessel is not here yet. Gail Heyer.
Present.
And Mark Howell. So we have a quorum and we can get started.
About 20% in the last 2 years.
We'll begin with just a couple of housekeeping items. Can I have a volunteer clerk for tonight's meeting?
You know, not pricing people out of coming in, but also making sure that we can continue to pay our employees a decent wage.
Okay, I'll do it.
Thank you, Gordon. And just moving on to outstanding minutes, we still need to see the February 24th minutes, but the March 2nd and March 9th minutes were attached to the meeting agenda. Did anybody have any feedback or corrections on the March 2nd minutes? Those were a set that Gordon provided. And like I said, there are pages 4 through 6, I think, of the as attached to the agenda and noted as draft. If there isn't any discussion, I know I read them and found them to be fine, so I would take a motion to approve those minutes.
I move to approve those minutes.
So that was March 2nd. And do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Gail. And any further discussion about the March 2nd minutes? Hearing none, I'll do a roll call. Gordon?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye.
David Smith, Gail?
Aye.
And myself, aye. So those are unanimously approved. And also the March 9th minutes, which Gail was the clerk for that meeting. I also found those to be fine. There was one strange, not quite a word that I noticed at some point in it. And, I didn't, oh yeah, it's as listed in the agenda. I could, it's page 12 of the agenda. I can put it on the screen. And I didn't, this last highlighted sentence, it says, Mr. Brockway said fiber construction redoubts to the town as a whole. I just didn't know what that word was supposed to be.
Well, redound means, I guess, delivers a benefit.
Oh, okay. Great. New vocabulary word for me then.
Yeah, you should go run off and take the SATs, huh?
Awesome. Great. So that was my only question. Otherwise, I found those to be fine. Did anybody else have any comments? Or
How about if do you want to change the word to benefits instead
No,
of redounds to benefits the town?
if you can
I have no idea.
And it's a real word.
It is a real word. I have no idea if I actually use that word.
That's
in my
Gail's
vocabulary.
rule.
Yeah, I thought I heard it. I don't remember if I watched the video, but and people could look it up and see what it means.
Great. I'm always happy to get a new vocabulary word. If only it were 5 letters so I could use it in Wordle. Okay. Further discussion? Are we ready for a motion on those?
I move to approve the March 9th minutes.
And do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Gail. And discussion, hearing none. I'll take a roll. Gordon?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye.
Gail? We didn't hear you, Gail. Okay, I'm going to say Gail abstains from that. And I will vote aye.
I'm sorry, I had to step out for a moment, but.
Oh, okay. So do
can
you vote to
repeat that?
approve the minutes?
Of the March 9th ones?
Yes,
Yes, I'll vote aye. Is now the right
Okay,
time for
good.
that? Okay,
sure.
sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
I was
Great.
just outside the door.
Okay. So quick work of that. Thank you very much. So that leaves us with just two sets outstanding still. Briefly on the chair's report side of things, I have scheduled quite a bit coming up this week or in the coming weeks. We will meet again next Thursday at 6:30, and that goal will be to finalize the draft report, which is what we're going to be spending most of our time on tonight as well. We are scheduled for, I believe, in Gordon, I know you made it to the light board meeting and I haven't had a chance to watch it. So if there's anything up to that, but I had discussed with Wendy Ravelli scheduling us for to discuss our recommendations with the light board. I'm highlighting this as though you guys can see it. Wait a minute. April 13th at 7:30 a.m. So that would be a presentation of action items, whatever we think we're looking for them to agree with. We have now scheduled a public hearing, and that's posted already on the town's website for the hearing room. It'll be hybrid, COVID permitting, of course. And it's also scheduled on Zoom for 7 p.m. on Thursday, April 14th. So that's 2 weeks from tonight. And then I wanted to just get a sense from you all about whether whether you have availability to meet again on April 21st, which is school vacation week, or should we just plan to go to April 28th, which would be probably one of our, we should be in wrap-up mode with whatever feedback we got from the public hearings and light board by then.
So
We should meet.
Yeah, I'm coming back that afternoon. So I theoretically I can attend. Yeah, I can definitely try to attend
Okay.
that one.
All right, let's put that on. You mean the 21st or the?
I'm talking about the 21st, yes.
Okay. All right, so we'll put that on the schedule if the situation changes or something happens. And I would like to get 2 shots at it, which would be good. Okay. So given that, I'm pretty much ready. I think we talked about the ARPA lost revenue stuff, and we don't have more on roads construction. So I'm almost ready to dive into the draft report. David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Sorry I'm late.
No problem. So just to catch you up, Gordon agreed to be clerk, and we approved the minutes of March 2nd and March 9th, although if you have anything specific you wanted to.
No.
Okay, great. Good. Great, so that I'm super happy with how that worked out, because it really reserves the bulk of our time for what I think is pretty much the most important part of what we need to be working on at the moment, which is sort of the structure and content of the report draft that we're working on. And as I got together with Gail yesterday, and we came up with what I would call an assembly process. which allows us to take the different sections that people have been contributing and effectively merge them together. My thinking is that we would discuss how the sections seem to flow, what pieces might be missing at this point that could be improved upon. And then once we have sort of settled on that, we can take a look at whether there are overlaps in some of the content and begin to do that. I wanted to sort of retain each of the work that all of you have been doing kind of in its original form, so that for the sections that you've been working on, you can, retain ownership, and yet it can go back together. The thinking is that we'll probably work with it roughly in this way for the next week, more or less. And then right after we meet next week, I'll create the version that will get distributed to the light board and to other interested reviewers. That would be posted on the website so that people who come to our public hearing or the light board meeting would have an opportunity to comment on that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about for schedule and content. And I guess I would probably notice also that Gordon, did you make a note that Scott left the meeting?
Okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I stopped typing and started listening to you.
Yeah. Okay.
What did I miss? Let's see. Okay, so what you just said was that what section of the agenda are we in? This is in the.
We're on we're on 6.
Okay.
We did the chair's report. We really didn't have any updates on 4 and 5.
Okay, let me bring that up. 4 and 5. Okay, 6. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're
Discussion.
talking about the draft report, and I was just alluding to the process, which was that I assembled everything that I had through yesterday, distributed that as a PDF and a Word file to all of you, and I think it's probably a good idea at this stage of the game to just sort of begin by kind of putting some of that on the screen and talking about what we have and what the flow is, and getting your suggestions or comments on any of the content that's in there. Okay.
Sounds good.
And what I said we would do is we'll probably work with it in this format through next week, and then create a first official draft that, oops, wrong file. Sorry about that. Stop share. Too many windows.
Don't mind. I'll just make a comment that I downloaded a bunch of the uploaded minutes, and starting from September, just read them
Yes.
quickly, and then found homes for stuff. Things that I found homes for in the sections of the report that I'm responsible for.
Right.
And I'll tell you what, it's like I only made it to October 14th.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm mostly, this week I mostly put metrics in. So that must have been when we spent a lot of time talking about metrics earlier in the year.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's so I don't really trust myself to remember all the things that we've said.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly don't want to please, if anybody sees that I didn't carry forward any of your ideas, I'm trying to have in mind a process that would prevent that by just being methodical about it. But it's an awful lot of work. There's a lot of minutes, a lot of material, and a lot of it duplicates itself.
Yeah. Really true. So I appreciate that you're doing that, and I think it's something that I've been also tending to do, which is going back and looking at some of those. Even in the sets of minutes that we just approved today, there were a few things to bring forward and put in notes. So what we in discussing a way to organize this, and sort of create a working file that we could, both work with individually and as a group in a way where we'd sort of know where we are. What I propose we do is I've created a folder that has in it each of the files that has been sent back to me, and some other files. And so what I'm doing is I'm basically just pulling each thing into the Word document sequentially. And we did this first page that's displayed on the screen right now is the abstract, which is meant to be essentially a versioning page. We'll drop it from the final, but it'll be replaced by a title page of some sort. But the idea is to try and give you a sense of how this has been constructed and what's in it. The preface section is a new section that I asked Gail to take a shot at, and we were thinking that for somebody reading this sometime in the future, it would be necessary to just actually describe the Article 41 and sort of how and when we did this work and why. And so she's agreed to do that. And so in the copy that you have, you can see that. The focus area definitions was a document that we created all the way back in September, when we kind of boiled down what was in the charge and the article to give us some structure. And we thought that sort of adhering to that structure, the 4 areas that were in there throughout the document would make sense and help it flow. I also wrote a section on which I've listed here as executive summary. It is meant to be readable and not too full of statistics or jargon, where someone can get a general idea of where we're going with this. And so I would really encourage feedback on that particular section because it is new. I'm hoping
Mark,
you guys got a chance to read some of it.
Is that the overview of the policy issues? Is that what
Yes.
you called it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's still got that title in it, and I'll begin to highlight where all of that is. In fact, why don't I? Let me just.
Yeah, I mean, I think for it to truly be an executive summary, you want to wait to finalize it
Yes.
till we're, done with the meat, but I think it's a fine start. I just
Right.
wanted to make that comment. There's no need to make it look
Yeah.
perfect right now.
Right, and I wanted to, essentially, and maybe this makes sense to do just on this version. So I'm writing that section, and this first page is housekeeping. Gail is working on this section. This was, completed in September. I'm just sort of trying to give you a way to. So that's a document that's, I think, even posted on our webpage already. This is new this week, and it's from me. The state of fiber section is the document that Gail, you provided. The state of finances of telecommunications. This is a placeholder for a section that Scott has committed to create. State of growth, and Gordon, what I did with this is the one document that I edited a bit. I took what you had sent and I merged it with the similar version where we had talked about recommendations from the week before, because they were sort of 2 parts of the same document. And that, I know that was largely written by me, but I did that just because you had sort of adopted that outline section, so I can point to where that changes over. And so that's all part of one document, but it's really 2 sections in one file. And also included in the recommendation section is the HOA piece that that David's been working on, and I would say that that is actually kind of here, because it fits into our framework as last mile. So any comments on any of that from an organizational perspective? Is that fairly clear? Okay. Let's sort of spin down through it.
Wait. So my question would be, this is, we're looking at what you distributed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it occurred to me that it would have been helpful had I sort of told you what, because to some extent, what you each wrote got renamed a little bit in this section outline. So I'm sort of heading towards a table of contents without actually having created the table of contents yet. Because, yes.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, I created a section in a way. I actually found a home for it, but
Okay.
metrics.
Good.
So I don't know if metrics need to bubble up to this level. Because here's the thing, though, is that looking at this outline, I'm not sure which one metrics belong in.
Yeah. It's one of those things where you could talk about metrics in each of those areas, like how do you measure 5 to 7% of the streets? How do you measure growth? How do you measure business performance? Or we could call out the metrics separately.
Yeah, it could have its own section. The other thing is GIS, I think, is similar to metrics.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, it's like, it's great that we've got them. I hope that nobody reading the report takes criticism when we say we could add more.
Yeah. Both good points. Is this, just give me some feedback right now, is this reasonably legible on the screen for you guys?
Yeah, if you could make it just a little bit bigger, it's much better than it was before you,
Before I resize the screen?
yeah.
I also try to leave some white space on the right-hand side, because I know that depending on how your video is set up, the right-hand side is often covered up. But is that?
Yeah,
That's good.
that's
Okay,
good. Thank you.
let's do that.
Yeah,
So-
regarding the metrics, I wonder, well, I don't know. I was kind of thinking we could work them into each section, where they're relevant to the state of whatever. And then, and I think we have a recommendation about metrics, right? That they should be tracked going forward.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's, it's worthwhile to name them, I think, in the topic areas, and then maybe in the governance section, suggests
Yeah.
some, activities, what count, in what forums and under what conditions should they be reviewed or public even.
This is a meta comment, and I think it connects to things we've debated back and forth, but I feel like as if what we're trying to recommend here is progress towards an achievement of universal access,
Mm-hmm.
defined as anybody who wants it can get it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the most important metrics in that case are ones that indicate progress towards that,
Mm-hmm.
or GIS presentations or whatever. So I'm offering this because we're still in the wordsmithing or creative step. And I think that if people agree that that is a motivating principle, then you can actually return to it again and again in many different contexts.
Yeah, that's a good point, Gordon. I would support that as our sort of theme. I mean, I kind of feel like okay. So I was gonna say any metrics describe, how are we going toward universal access, but I guess that's not really true, because some of them are more financial related. And, and you could say, you know, the financial stuff is subsidiary to, it's more important that everyone gets access. You know, I'm not saying that that's what we're saying, but
Yeah, and it can obscure progress towards it. Like if, like, you know, we hire a bunch of new people and eliminate the backlog. That's great, and that would show up in a properly defined metric. Is if the metric measures the backlog and it got smaller, great. But does that actually get us closer to universal access? If the only people only people in that backlog are ones that had universal access under this definition, then universal access wasn't actually. Anyway, it's a complex, it's a good solid business with a lot of dimensions to it. We're not going to boil it down to any one metric. I kind of like the idea of having a summary of the metrics. Maybe that's what you just said. Probably, and that, you know, I don't think you really want to define them every time they're mentioned, but define them at least once, maybe in the place where they're summarized.
Yeah, I think that, and you know, it's good for us to have this discussion, because I think as we sort of cruise down through this document, we're obviously not going to read it out verbatim on this call. We're going to talk about what's in it and how it seems to be shaping up more, and take some feedback on that. But I do think getting clear on the goal of, you know, completing the fiber network, which I think is important to be sort of articulated. The mission that we were given right up in the preface should say something about, you know, the question was, what does it take to finish the job? And in the area that I framed in beginning on the in the later section, in section 4, I kind of try and lay out sort of how did we get here, as a way of introducing that. But some of these financial metrics really do create the enabling conditions. Like if there's no money for capital projects, it doesn't really matter whether you have a goal or a metric for, you know, connecting people. You can't do it because there's no resources. So I think that's what leads us to some of these other measures. Okay, so I'm going to suggest that I'm actually, okay, I was thinking about opening this in the other thing, but so starting on the second page is it is the portion, get rid of some of the editing things, that Gail has worked on for a preface.
And I mostly took it from Article 41 and the materials that were published at town meeting for Article 41. You know, one interesting thing, and I don't need to get too much in the details here, but I think I was told at town meeting time that there were 1,700 customers. And more recently, we've been talking about 1,500. So I'm not sure what happened, but I wasn't comfortable putting 1,700 in because I don't know if that's the current number. So maybe just leave it out. But in any event,
the last number I heard was 1,562. So approaching 1,600 is probably fair. I don't think it's ever been higher than that.
Okay.
But that's a good. So, and again, so I think you recognize beginning. So that's just one page, and I think that's a good starting point. And if anybody has any specific comments on it, I guess the idea would be to direct those potentially back to Gail, and then that would lead into this notion that from this document, and I'll admit that I haven't really closely reread this document. I know that it, again, at a high level, sort of tried to talk about the objectives, talk about how to measure things, and in an outline format. But I do think it was, we could ask ourselves, have we studied and, you know, pulled in some information on each of these things, and what's the status of that? And it might not be a bad conversation to have. Does anything jump out at anybody about this? Looking at it again, almost 6 months later.
Well, I I looked at part A, letter G, where it says solutions will be presented in the context of the policy decisions that would be associated with implementing. I thought that was really important. I thought that was a good goal. And so I guess would that be, I don't know, I guess when I was rereading my section, this state of the fiber section, I definitely like put some recommendations in there. I think what we're saying is the recommendations we should try to push those to the last section called recommendations. Is that right? And I don't know, I just was kind of wondering how do you develop the idea? But you don't want to have too much, stuff if you're trying to, like as Scott likes to say, describe the problem. You don't want to be jumping right into the solutions.
Yeah, I think there's the reason for developing the sort of back matter and having the deeper sections. I mean, going back to our overall outline, remind me to come back to page 3. But in my mind, anyway, these 3 sections, or any section that we call state of, is kind of a detailed treatise on a particular portion of this. And it can go as deep as it wants to, and should, for somebody who is really, really interested in the meat of it, like what's the actual topic about. You can read that section and understand clearly how we got to the recommendations. And then I'd be inclined to repeat the recommendations in the recommendations associated with these focus areas.
Okay.
So that, to me, that makes sense. So, if you're not interested in, a master class on one, on telecommunications finances, you may not read that section, but you might very happily read the section that says, how should we measure it, or what goals should we set? That's comes to you either from the beginning section or the very end. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
So wait, so sort of if you had the greatest hits of the state of sections, they could end up in section 8?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. And we kind of almost have to do something like that, because we're going to, if you looked at the agenda that I set out for the 14th, which I know I didn't display, but I said we would present some kind of overview of what the recommendations were, and then invite people to comment on the draft of the report, which presumably they'll have, because we can't sit there in a public hearing and read the report to people. No, that wouldn't make sense. So we kind of, just by virtue of the sort of schedule that we have to inform the various constituencies about what we've done, we're going to have to come up with a list. These are the things we're recommending as a summary of and by the way, go back and read the 50 pages or whatever this turns out to be, if you really want to know how we got there.
I kind of think of metrics as being recommended.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they could go in the recommendation section, and like,
They are, but in many ways, quite a few of the metrics that we've talked about are actually industry standard, statistics that are generated by all kinds of businesses. They become recommendations when we say things like, we're recommending that the target, take rate be set at 30%, or a target take rate be developed by doing some kind of study.
Yeah, so it's like, not to beat metrics to death, but I could see like a pattern where you define a metric, and then you'd attach to it, you describe the decision-making consequences of it. And you could that could consist of when this rises, that's good. When this falls, that's bad. If it's falling, then decision makers may want to consider actions like,
Mhm.
or you know what I mean? It's like, so you could,
Yeah.
if we, I'd love it if we found a pattern to it where it would, like, you'd almost put it in a table, and
Right.
then it'd be very systematic. You'd say, okay, this metric, why is it, what's its value? How's it defined? What's its management impact or implication? And that being, the implication being connecting to what this report is actually pushing towards, which is universal access,
Right.
or certain a few other things. But yeah, anyway, I'm sorry, I'm beating that particular thing to death. But you know, maybe you could. The other thing is, I just, we were on page 3 a second ago,
Yeah.
and that last 5 to 7% of streets didn't really look like a set of recommendations to me.
Yeah. It
Maybe
is.
some of it. Okay, maybe it was. I don't know.
Yeah.
No,
Well,
it's
so
not, right?
it was
Definition.
part of the problem definition originally. Go ahead, Gail.
Oh, yeah, no, it's just the focus area definitions. It's not a recommendation.
Oh, okay, all right, okay. I was in
so
section.
it
We
just-
were just looking at section 3, and then I mistook it for section 8. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, so for example, and just, you know, picking up on exactly the process that you were saying, if we think about universal access, you know, the objective in metric terms could be drive premises served, that's a metric, to 100%, right? So today we know that premises served is someplace around whatever it was, 76% or 74%, I forgot the number exactly, but it was 6,000 something out of 8,000 something, right? You remember that discussion?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and so we could, that's a way of actually having a concrete measurement about that, and we could talk about, you know, whether and on the growth side, and we had this discussion a little bit last week when we were talking about actually in the context of what's been lost in ARPA, we were, you know, is the growth linear? Do we expect something on the order of 195 new subscriptions every year, and that's what we're doing as a, you know, as a steady state, or are we expecting some percentage growth, in which case it's different? We could weigh in on what we think. The more I think about that, the more I think that, you know, we have a fixed amount of staff, we kind of have a fixed amount of resources that's available, and a process that turns at a certain level. That would, you know, from a process engineering perspective, I would say that we probably have a fixed capacity within that process, whether it's 195 or some different number. But it, you know, unless we change the resources available to that process, it's not likely to change its output. Anyway, so that could be, you know, so I'm just kind of taking notes here, but that could be, you know, that could take the form of grow at 195 subscriptions per year, right? That would be a statement of a, is it the right one or not? I don't know, but you know, what I'm saying is we could get to that after we've just you know, described what those processes are.
Yeah, or you know, improve the rate of installations, or
Yeah.
drive the backlog down. Those are all, I think of them as actions, or
Yeah.
goals, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. So those are the kind of metrics that it's, you know, it's fairly easy to frame. Yeah, we could have a different one that was process oriented, which is, you know, increase capacity to grow. I wish I could type from, you know, or by 20%, right? But those are all, and we could just try some of those on for fit, or understand how we might do that.
Yeah, it's funny. I was starting off by talking about the importance of a metric and then the management actions associated with it. But I think what you just did was you inverted it.
Mhm.
Uh, Organizational goals, and then what you need to do in order to reach those goals.
Mhm.
Goals, targets, capabilities, that kind of, right? A little different than a metric, right? The metric can help you get there, but you start with the goal,
Right.
universal access, or like you said, hey, we need to grow faster. Example I had was need to decrease the backlog. And
Yeah.
then from that flows the metrics anyway. See, and I said from the beginning, I've kind of thought that this report is a gift to decision makers, like board staff, whatever, about ways that they can they internalize this report, they could maybe improve.
Yeah. And that's what I think leads us into wanting to say some things about governance, because we'll get to this when we talk a little bit about what I've sort of put in this section that I'm aspirationally calling the executive summary. I think it is up to the citizens of the community to set these objectives, and and sort of consider what it means to set the objectives in terms of commitment, and then frame that and look for staff and the various ongoing boards to plan to implement that. And I think if we can give them some gift, as you put it, Gordon, to as to how they might go about doing that, I think that's a very good start. Okay, so having said that, let's just, because I do have a hope that we'll sort of at least cover what's in this. So the last 5 to 7% of streets, understanding the barriers to growth, which boils down to a lot of those, which maybe brings us into the take rate and some of those questions about, how big is the market and how do we understand saturation and those kinds of things. The specific barriers to installing fiber is section C. And I think that there's going to be some overlap. There's at least 2 different dimensions to looking at that. One is the physical issues about, sort of installing fiber itself from an engineering perspective. And then there's the pieces that, David was tackling about what happens when the transaction is kind of, not able to be completed for whatever reason, like a third party is involved that has little or no motivation to allow it to happen. What can be done about that is really, I think, what that section starts to get into. And then the third part is really the everything else stuff, which is, touches on some things that we've talked about already tonight, and one that I'm seriously going to try to stay away from tonight, because I always talk about it, is the payment in lieu of franchise. Maybe I won't stay.
Just briefly, I brought up that issue in the light board meeting yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's the first time they've heard anybody complain about it. Maybe complain is the wrong word. And I don't, and I didn't make any change anybody's minds or anything like that. I just wanted them to hear it.
I might have said something about this last week, and if I did and didn't act on it, then I apologize. But I think that I would like to at least consider, among, from the task force perspective, taking a specific position about whether we think that payment in lieu of franchise should remain or not remain, and make a specific recommendation about that. I feel strongly enough about it to want to at least have that discussion. And I don't mind coming up with a proposal for it for next time around. If you
I'd
guys,
say, you know, here, I've already gone to bat for the idea, but I just say this, that if that payment were actually baked into what the division is already planning to do,
Mhm.
then it doesn't necessarily impede these other goals per se,
Yeah,
right? That, for instance, it might mean that rates just have to be that much higher, for instance. But as long as rates are set high enough that it generates the kind of funds that are needed in order to do all this other things, then it's kind of a don't care as far as
Okay.
reaching our goals. So the other thing is that I don't think that we're going to make a lot of progress on this.
Mhm.
I just don't think that the light board didn't have any questions or response. The board didn't care about it. The
Mhm.
division, the director didn't really care about it. I think that it's a different town manager, but this town manager isn't going to probably be anxious to change a decision that was made. So it may not really be worth our spending too much time on.
I agree that so what I'm going to propose that I do, and I'm going to make a actual physical note about that, is I'll come up with a proposal for what I think we should do about it, and put it on our agenda for maybe next meeting, and then we'll have the discussion, decide, and then we'll just go with that decision and call it closed. How about that?
Wasn't this a recently, when did the payment in lieu franchise start being paid? Was it just 2020?
2021, I believe. So this
Yeah, it
is
was the first year.
Okay,
This-
well,
last year
yeah.
was the first year, or this
I
year.
mean, it
was-
seems to me, if like previous to 2021, there wasn't one, and the town manager decided that there would be one, like, why can't you? I don't know, it seems like relatively easy to like
Yeah,
do something
clearly-
different next year. That's just an observation.
Yeah,
I'm not.
and the sooner the better.
Yeah,
If we were really going to slap it down, we would have slapped it down today. I mean, in 2022.
Mhm. I think too that it had, like any use of funds, it's one thing to sort of in the abstract have an opinion about how those funds are being used. It's another thing to say, well, I can buy this with that money, or I can buy this with that money. And maybe I feel strongly about the right hand or the left hand, as opposed to just, I don't think it's a good idea to spend money on X, which is
Yeah, it'd be
different.
like asking BD Center to pay for, I don't know, wheelchairs or something, just because they're both vaguely physical. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Let's not get too carried away with this.
But anyway, that's in that section. So
Yeah.
this section, this next section, so it starts out overview of policy issues. That's a title, was a working title that I did, but I think this is where we would place the executive summary. And just because I realize that maybe not everybody's had a chance to read through this, I won't call it letter perfect. But the idea was to at least briefly allude to how did Concord create this network in the first place, and point a way to get more information about that. Talk about the specific benefits the fiber optic network is already delivering to the community. Again, I think there's a place for that in this report, which is a couple of paragraphs long. Talk briefly, and you almost alluded to this just now, Gordon, about how does broadband compare with other municipal enterprises and services? So there's some services that are nearly universal, like electric, and there are others like the sewer system that only cover parts of town. And the water department only supplies water to parts of town. So you can there's a decision to be made on the community's behalf about how much coverage is expected from broadband. That's a question that's never really been engaged as far as I can tell. So I thought it made sense to do that. The other thing is that this is a service that's competitive, like the BD Center is competing with other exercise facilities and health clubs and things, which are private entities. The water department has no such competition, neither does electric. So, kind of worthwhile to just touch on those for people that haven't thought deeply about, what an enterprise is.
Mark, I was wondering, like on this last paragraph that's on your screen right now, you have broadband is an example of a utility service. I thought we were not supposed to use the word utility in relation to broadband, and I if that's important, if we need to
Good point.
delve into that. I mean, I think some people, I'm not necessarily in Concord, but there's some talk about maybe it should be, but I think, that's only if it's provided by the municipality, I don't think, well, I don't know, I guess you could just have a whole regulation of all the internet service providers as regulate them as utilities, but that's not what we're tasked with answering.
Good question. I mean, we could call it an infrastructure service. Or just a service. It doesn't have
And
to.
I guess what you're saying, Scott, is you didn't mean to import the any legalistic implications where
No.
utility is a something that people need and have a reason to expect. And honestly, I think that's where when we got immediate pushback, like I remember being in a light board meeting and the town manager says, look, you don't want to make it into that. You don't want to make it into something that we have this overwhelming obligation to serve. And honestly, there's a practical reason for it. It's like the 10 miles of street we still don't have, and the 100 deep backlog. So we're not really in a good position to actually take on that kind of responsibility right now.
Yeah. So I'm gonna just, if I can do this, but that's a good point. And I think that if we're, and I can, so the real question is, should we refrain from referring to broadband as a utility at all? And I can see, so yes, I was using it in a more, in a more general sense, but yeah.
If they service, an example of a service, didn't mean that, but
Yeah, well, it could be called, it is a service, and it could be called an infrastructure service even.
yeah. I mean, our trash is similar in that it's available, but it's not people don't want to have it. Actually, maybe it's not similar, because anybody that wants it, there's universal access to trash service in Concord.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, the difference between, I'm sorry, Gordon, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, so I'm looking at this and I'm seeing the difference between the utilities, which is electric, water, sewer, and the other things like recreation, solid waste. The former are not competitive. Right. I guess you can have your own water system and you can have your own sewer system, but you can't like hire some third-party company to do a neighborhood sewer, right? There's no competition in those. But there is competition for recreation, and there is competition for solid waste, and right now there is competition for broadband. And I don't think in our foreseeable future that we will be in a place where there is no competition for broadband.
Well, maybe to fix that sentence, maybe we don't need to find something that it is an example of. It can be its own example, and we just get rid of, rephrase that.
Yeah, I mean, 2 paragraphs earlier, broadband service falls into it, like recreation, solid waste disposal. Private sector offers alternatives to the town service. Child care, housing, human services. Daycare is an example where the town provides some, but you can also access that from a private sector. And the level of investment that you make in those, for example, the town's not obligated really to provide the capacity in the daycare space for every child in town, because there are commercial alternatives and whatever. Whereas from an electric perspective, we are sort of obligated. And so that's kind of the broad point. The goal of this last section is really to raise some of the questions that I think need to be answered from a policies perspective. You know, do we
Okay.
understand why we're doing it in the first place? Why is it fiber? You know, why, and having a sense of what is the, you know, is it really to make sure that there's competition? Is it really to, you know, make some money to pay for something like, you know, something else, or to have access to staff? It has all these benefits. The question is, have we really asked ourselves sort of what are we, you know, what's the real purpose of doing it?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it's a little bit of a hybrid, right? Because fiber is like, I like the road network analogy. And Mark, I don't know if you worked that into this executive summary. Maybe if you haven't, maybe you should. Like the analogy that it's like a network of roads, and it can be traversed upon by Comcast or, you know, Verizon or whoever wants to sell internet, right? I mean, I think like we could allow competitive internet service providers on Concord's fiber, right? So it's facilitating competition. So it's, anyway, it's got some different.
I mean, if you want to just fix that sentence there where it's highlighted, you could say of an elective utility service, and then I'd be happy.
Right. Yeah, and I will keep this discussion in mind. That's why I threw a note in here.
Yeah.
To,
And we'll have another shot at this. But, you
Yeah.
know, honestly, we can more efficiently solve these wordsmithing issues offline with, you know, a comment-based thing. And
But the use of utility is, it's a useful thing to call out, that is, because that is a specific term. It implies some things that I certainly, you know, it was a little sloppy to use it right here.
well, and I think that if we do achieve universal access, then it could become a utility.
Yeah. One of the, sorry. One of the things that I would note is that I sent something earlier today, which was really from an adjacent community, but Carlisle, but it caused me to look up, you know, what Starlink is offering. And Starlink is, and this section does allude to low Earth orbit internet service providers as a source of competition for, in fact, I think it's in this next section right here, as a source of competition to Concord Light, Broadband, and fiber optic. And it's a useful comparison, I think, because though that provider, in particular SpaceX's Starlink service, is basically the same service. It's internet access and not much else, as opposed to, you know, the incumbent cable provider who's providing all these other services. So the 2 points about that I think are important is, A, there's a legitimate competitor. It is offering a, you know, a functionally nearly equivalent service. And the other one is, that's a competitor that didn't exist in 2014 when this service was started in the first place, which I think calls our attention to the fact that this is a, you know, moving target, really, what the environment for these utilities are. And that's a unique, or not unique completely to all of these things, because the BD Center, you could have somebody could build a swimming pool and start offering those services too in town, but you're not likely to get somebody sinking a well and trying to sell water to the rest of the community. Just a quick point on that. So that
goes to the point that we don't want to push the risk envelope too hard, because
agreed.
there's risk out there.
Yeah. 5G fixed wireless, as Scott has mentioned a couple of times, is also potentially coming competition in there, and that's important to understand.
I see you mentioning that.
Yeah, and that's mentioned in here. And then the community needs to choose how it approaches digital equity. So I think, you know, certainly one of the reasons I signed on to this whole effort that Gail originally sponsored was that I found it disturbing that we had, to some extent, managed to overlook that in a certain way. And so I called attention to it here.
I'm sorry, we overlooked what?
The fact that the network itself ended up being deployed disproportionately to the higher income portions of town.
Okay.
Digital equity.
Digital equity is, you know. And then the last point so far in this section was recognition of something that I think we've observed in the data, which is that the growth has been slowing, and we kind of need to understand why that has been occurring before we, you know, try and spend some in. And I know that in your section, Gordon, you talked about the growth flywheel, and, you know, but what happens when that flywheel does start to slow down, and, you know, are we well positioned to accomplish the goals? If that is the case, do we understand if that's the case or not? So that's what's in that section. I'd appreciate any more specific feedback on it. And then I'm going to keep moving just because of time. Starting on page 8, now we have the what is fiber section that Gail authored, I believe.
Yeah, do you want me to talk about it, Mark?
Yes, please.
Okay, so yeah, I just wanted to just kind of define fiber at a very basic level. You know, it focuses it. So what I've read that it uses glass strands, but I've also read that it could use plastic. Mark, could you elaborate on that? Are they like either or does Concord use one or the other, or maybe they might use them interchangeably?
It's fiberglass, which is, you know, originally developed by Dow Corning. So it is actually a type of glass.
Okay, so I could take out the plastic part.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Oh, thanks, Scott. Thank you. Okay. So, and then just, you know, basically I said, you know, customers can receive broadband through fiber via internet cables for wired connections, or they can use, you know, their wireless radio on their router for Wi-Fi. You know, I said the municipal buildings have it. The smart grid is overlaid on the town's fiber. I don't know if you want to say more about that, you know, that for the process of the advanced, you know, metering thing, but I don't know, I don't want to get too much into that.
Would we want to mention that the street lights form a wireless mesh with 9 gateways to our fiber infrastructure? I think it's 9, Mark.
I think there's about 80 of them actually, but yes.
Oh, that's right. That's right. So, but I mean, I don't know if it's important to mention or not, but that does exist. There's a wireless mesh that overlays our town. It's for wireless.
Okay, yeah, thanks for reminding me about that. I mean, I guess the benefit of that is what the town knows if lights are out, or why is that?
I think they use it for controlling timing,
Okay.
turning them on and off.
Okay.
Yeah, the design of the original smart grid, it reads meters and can connect certain load control switches. There are systems for streetlight control, but that's not really part of that. That's one of the applications, and I noticed you start to talk about the sustainability principles, and certainly you alluded to the smart grid, which I think is, you know, for the purpose of this section is probably enough discussion of that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, let's.
Well,
Yeah, introductory.
the one thing that caught my eye was that this is an instance of if we word it right, we can show that the Concord's fiber capability does more than just one thing. So, you know, I'm not that familiar with the streetlights and stuff. If you come up with a sentence that describes how one depends on the other, then that is just a way of expressing the idea that that building this out is going to provide value in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, I think that's important, Gordon. I'm not as familiar with that, or I don't like fully understand it well enough to write
Yeah,
about it.
neither do I actually. So
Yeah,
maybe if
so, but I
Scott had
think it
or
is-
Mark had an idea on that.
Yeah, that's important because I think it's important for people to
If you
understand
ping
that.
me, I can try and, if you ping me, I can try and take a draft out of it.
Okay.
I'll work on it.
Yeah, it's important for people to understand that this is not just a way to get internet, you know, like what are the other benefits, and it's the connectivity, you know, and the opportunity for
I mean, if you're talking about the fiber plant, which is the fiber that's laid all over town, I think, Mark, some of the fibers used for police and emergency repeaters. There's access to a reservoir that's up on the north side of town somewhere that we can monitor. There's all kinds of things. And then the schools as well. And the municipality itself.
Yeah, Scott's absolutely right about that. And, you know, even, for example, all the school buildings are interconnected with each other using the fiber system. And that allows them to have essentially unlimited communications across I think there's 13 or something like that, something on that order of school buildings for essentially a fixed cost of just maintaining that fiber. And after that, they can do whatever they want, and it's almost infinitely upgradable and has been upgraded over the years. So and that's what I think what I was alluding to in that executive summary session. And if you just, you know, even put a placeholder in where you want more said on that, I'll be happy to add the more in.
Yeah, it's a little bit abstract to me, so it's hard for me to pin that down. But I think it's important for people to understand, you know, the multiple kind of uses and benefits. So I talked about.
I'm sorry, just to pile on, you mentioned schools there, Scott. If we could add to the mix universal access, then that would actually open up new possibilities at the schools. Right now, the schools use it within their closed buildings.
Yeah.
But universal access then could be a platform for letting school children and parents and potentially teachers have the same benefits that they would otherwise need to drive to school to get. You see what I mean? And so
No,
I'm sorry.
I actually don't, because this is really talking about giving internet access to school children when they're at home.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about, which is, I think that kind of clouds all this, frankly.
Well,
it's just universal access, period, whether or not they're going to school or whether they're taking a class from Udemy or taking
Okay,
online education.
let me break that down into two more steps. Okay, like for instance, what if you wanted to have your kindergarten children use a internet, use a tablet or something to access something going on at school? And let's say you're a parent that's not really thrilled about having your kid on the internet. They're allowed to do that in school in the safe space of the classroom where it's not the generalized internet, it's a closed system. If you then implement universal access so that fiber is available to any school child, then that closed, safe teaching environment can be extended out to the home in a safe way, and closed way.
I think you're confusing the physical level with what would normally be the approach that's taken universally for corporations. Is that, you know, there are gateways and gateway things on the device that will stop you from going places you're not supposed to go. For example, a corporate PC that I have is somewhat bound to whitelisted websites, and if I go to someplace questionable, it will stop me in my tracks. And that mechanism doesn't require a physicality of a network, and that technology exists today. And to me, it doesn't exactly make sense, because many of the children in your example would be at homes that have some other form of internet access. Comcast, for example. So the way to protect all those children is not by drawing another physical network all the way out to those homes, but rather endpoint protection at both ends basically doesn't let them go to wherever, except for where they're supposed to, maybe even a VPN.
I don't think, I don't think the schools have the technological capability to do like a corporate type security system, from my experience. So I
Uh,
understand what you're saying, Scott. It's like a VPN
maybe
idea.
the other way to say it would be considerably less expensive to solve it with those kinds of tools at the endpoints and letting them tunnel through the public internet but not be able to get to it. I mean, and I'm
Okay,
talking
all
like
right.
30, 40, 50 bucks per endpoint as opposed to $1,000 per endpoint.
Look, I'm just trying to offer, and go ahead and shoot it down. I'm not married to the idea. I'm just trying to offer reasons why extending the physicality of the campus out to any arbitrary place in town could have some value. Ball's in your court. See if you can come up with one. You just shot down mine. I don't care. I don't really.
Yeah.
I don't care about this idea. I'm just brainstorming and trying to offer reasons
Sure.
why.
But
Having this
that's not our
physical-
charter. Our charter is not to extend the school network. Our charter is to have broadband accessibility to everyone in Concord, or make it available to anyone in Concord. That's the charter, right? That's
Right.
our charter.
I understand that,
That's the
and what I'm
problem we're
trying to
trying to solve. And
I'm trying
what
to
you're proposing-
offer
Okay.
reasons why it would matter whether or not people have access to the Concord net or not.
Just
And,
one at a time.
that's all.
I'm gonna step in and frame it this way. I think that when we put a digital equity lens on it and recognize that, extending a virtual classroom experience often exceeds the capabilities of a basic internet connection. The availability of fiber access to, premises in the community, particularly if there are any low-income, premises, low-income families that also have children and maybe more than one children. There's a child that's trying to do it, and maybe they're using devices provided by the school. There's a real, I think there's a real benefit to being able to say, hey, we can provide you with all the bandwidth you could possibly need to make sure that experience is as good as it possibly could be. Setting aside some of the legitimate, what's the best way to do that kind of comments that Scott was saying, I do think that there's at least an argument for the opportunity for some enhanced collaboration, sort of inside the fence, if you will, without ever actually having to step out onto the internet at all, which has some obvious advantages. But so I think we could frame, at least directionally, that there's potentially some benefits there, and there are others as well. And like I said, the management of the sewer system, pump stations, all the various wells in town, those are connected through a private network, which is enabled by the fiber, to have that very important control. And as we think about security and resilience in the community, these are important concepts that are opportunities that are enabled. I think, Gordon, the thing that I like about what you were suggesting is, let's think about the ways in which not just the school buildings or the municipal buildings or the businesses, but what advantages come specifically from making sure that every residential premise has access to, like, what do you end up being able to do in that case that's not existing if you just connect the main school buildings to each other? Isn't that where you start?
Yeah. And I was just throwing out ideas. Anything we can do to try and sell that notion, I think, also helps motivate or demonstrate the value of universal access.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I had talked about, if you want to go up just a little bit,
Sure.
Mark, thanks. Just a little bit more so you can see where I started, benefits of fiber. Yeah, so I just was kind of, gosh, let's see here. So fiber can transmit, almost an unlimited amount of data, unlimited speeds, unlimited number of devices, and how that scalability, contrasts with broadband via radio waves or wireless. I talk about the reliability, and then, the privacy, security. And then
Would you not want to mention for the fiber that the fact that it doesn't contain EMI, it doesn't conduct electricity, it doesn't have a lot of fundamentally any risk that's associated with radio waves or electromagnetic radiation?
Yeah, no, I did have that in there. I think, and I get to it a little bit
Okay,
more.
I'm sorry.
No, thank you. And the sustainability principles, which is something I'd like to see town talk about that more in decision making. So I went, there's 4 of them. The first one is reduce dependence on fossil fuels, underground metals and minerals. And because fiber is made with glass, it's not copper, which a lot of the the cables are made with. We're minimizing the use of underground metals there, and also because it's conducting along utility lines, we wouldn't have to be placing a big wireless tower or small cells throughout town. So it's it's sustainable in that sense. Couldn't really see how it related to synthetic chemicals or manufactured substances, so I kind of skipped over that second principle. The third principle, which is reduce encroachment on nature, a lot of people are upset about the idea of wireless towers infringing on the landscape. I've seen other places around the country where trees have been cut down to improve service, and so obviously because the fiber can go underground or just along the utility lines, it's not encroaching on nature. Let's see, and then I talk a bit about the EMFs, coming from the wireless towers and the small cells. Some people, there are some studies about, the harm from that. Some people claim it could harm plants or wildlife. And then there's also, so I get that's part of the nature thing. And then the fourth piece, which is the fourth principle, is meet human needs fairly and efficiently. And I think that goes to Scott's point. There are people who suffer health effects from electro hypersensitivity, and those people all favor wired solutions to internet. So that is, something where, if someone cares about that, if it's important to them, they would prefer a fiber solution. And I talked a bit about here, broadband alternatives and competition, just like what, some of the differences are. Just look at, definitional stuff. And then let's see here. I did bring up the example here of the city or Chattanooga, and I think it's actually not just the city, but it's Hamilton County in Tennessee, that has a municipal electric company that also offers broadband. It's called EPB.
Mhm.
And starting in 2010, they've made a massive investment. I want to say it was like 200 million. And I think they maybe had gotten a grant for another 200 million to bring fiber to every home and business in a 600 square mile area. And there's a lot of competition. I was looking into it. They're not the only ISP. So and there's a report that I referenced here, 10 years of fiber optic and smart grid infrastructure in Hamilton County by Dr. Bento Lobo. And that just has a lot of really good stuff in it about, what can be the benefits of large scale investment in fiber. So I wanted to highlight that for people who want to get more information. And then let's see. So as this is the section, the state of fiber. I wanted to kind of explain the terminology a bit and the issue, the basic issues. And so I had a paragraph here about last mile, which, we're all pretty familiar with the issues there. So could you scroll down a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah, and then you have the statistics.
Yeah, and then I got into the the data from the GIS and talk about how you can go down a little bit further. You can go to, yeah, keep going. And then how we use the GIS data to drill down on streets, parcels and addresses. I got some questions in here. I don't know if we need to get into all this detail right now, but I just kind of, so our basic question is how many addresses could not subscribe if they wanted to, and we came up with about 2,000. And then I said I wanted to look at this from not I did, but sorry, that the task force looked at this question from a geographical perspective, and also by the type of unserved
Right.
Person, resident, business, whatever. So the streets analysis is next, and just talking about the different groups. I talked about how we put the streets that don't have fiber into 52 sort of groupings. And then I put in there about the cost estimate from that Schools, Health and Libraries Broadband Coalition.
Great.
Can we go down a little bit more? And I just talk about how, if you hang the fiber on overhead, it's about 51,000 per mile. The new, the undergrounding is more expensive at 86,000. And, I pointed out that this is a lot less than, I think the Light Board has talked about, $1 million a mile they thought that was the cost, and that's just really not.
That's for electric.
Right. Okay, well.
Oh, okay, well, you say that. I mean, and we don't know if a fiber only rollout undergrounding effort would be less expensive, but
I know
if it is, it ought to be known. We don't know. That's something to press on.
We actually, that's part of what I got in my conversation with the folks in Washington this week. But the bottom line is, think $1.50 a foot.
What?
The bottom line, what, Scott?
The group in Washington that we talked about with the vibratory plow and a lot of the rural deployments. Yep. Their cost point is around, and they do a lot of undergrounding with fiber. They're doing a lot more installs than we are. Their cost point is around $1.50 a foot.
Do you know what that works out to be a mile?
5,280 feet in a mile.
Yes.
Times one and.
About $8,000 a mile.
Wow. Yep.
Yeah.
$5,000 a mile, right?
Yeah.
$1.50, he said.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, $1.50. So eight and change.
So it's
and not to take
$1 million.
Yeah, a lot less than $1 million, and not to take the conversation off in a random direction, but this is important. Like, for instance, we had a conversation earlier in the year about, hey, there's going to be some street paving going on. Could we get some fiber put in? And the answer was, well, gee, we blew our $1 million a mile budget. And honestly, if it were only $5,000, I bet you they could come up with the money for it.
And while the real number may fall somewhere in between those, if there's no mechanism that sets aside money to do this in the first place, especially for those areas that fall into the uniquely, they just need fiber, they don't even need electric undergrounding.
Yeah.
When does that situation get reconciled? And so I think that those are great questions to make sure that we've actually raised in this section, and then again later in the recommendations we'll say what we think needs to be done about this. My sense is that with the resources that we have and the time that we have, we're not going to be able to answer the question of exactly how much it does it cost, but I do think we can make the very firm statement that it's a quantifiable number, and that there is a finite set of projects that need to be done, and the activity of actually sizing that and understanding it so that it can be planned is what's really recommended, what's called for.
Yeah.
That was part of that capital thing that I had written last week.
Is that capital piece in this document, Mark?
I sure hope it is. It was supposed to be.
I can't remember if anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me just kind of breeze
I
through
think
this?
I think I put it down in the recommendation
Okay,
section.
okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had just some recommendations about, do the fiber while paving, micro trenching, ditch witch. And then I also threw in here about, the town should consider offering financing or
Mhm,
the ability to, for a betterment or to pay the cost over time.
mhm.
And then let's see, I talk about the areas where the fiber is not available. What are
Mm.
these areas like? Is it multi-dwellings? Is it
Yeah.
single family? Could you
Mhm.
scroll down a little bit more?
Yep.
Okay, so yeah,
I did stick the conduit policy in at the end of
okay,
this document.
yeah. Yeah, so just more about how can we get the fiber into the streets? What are some recommendations for that? And then I get into the addresses piece, like breaking them out. So Scott, I'm sorry you can't see the screen because I'm very proud of my pie chart. I think it's the first one I've ever made in the last several decades anyway. So I don't know, anyway, it is what it is. So the fiber in the street but not available.
I
is
did
actually
see it.
more than- you did see it, yeah. It's more than half the pie. So that that is a little bit of a
Mhm.
unknown, and then the reason, well, anyway, it's what we have.
Yeah.
And I think Concord Green is in that, I think, but I'm not sure.
Mhm.
So, but that was interesting, the no access from Concord is like a fifth of that, and that's just almost 95% of that is Nathan Pratt Drive, that
Mm.
big apartment complex there.
Right.
So this is the unserved pie. This is like, how this
And
breaks
yet
out.
within that no access from Concord, from there, we happen to know that the light plant owns a piece of property that directly abuts that piece of property.
Yeah, so
So,
it'd be great if we could point that out, but you know what? I think that the real deal killer is the fact that it's an apartment. And Concord Broadband has not embraced the idea of serving apartments.
yeah, which is,
Gail, do you mind a nitpick? I'm sorry.
Sure, yeah.
But for that lovely chart, pie chart, you may be able to right click on it somewhere. You might maybe when it's still in Excel, you might.
Okay.
And add the percentages to it. Yeah, add data
Okay.
labels.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I didn't.
Okay, there we
follow
go.
much. Thank you.
That's exactly what I wanted.
Oh, great.
yeah.
Oh, that's fancy. It kept it even from Excel.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah. So that's, I mean, it obviously needs a little footnoting and such. And did anyone have any thoughts about, the fact that the fiber in street but not available? I mean, that's the biggest piece.
Oh, well, yeah. Staff still owes us data.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of time for them to do so, but it's not impossible either. So maybe this data will get into better focus before we publish. And that, I think, ought to be something that we mention when we present, that look, hey, you know what? We started this conversation in September.
Right. I will say that I did, we did make that request, and just before last week's meeting, Jason Bolger had sent me something that the telecom staff had worked on. The annotations that they did, while I'm sure informative and meaning something to them, were not particularly useful for any more detailed analysis than what we've already done. So, my impression is that that's going to be a piece of work that we might want to write a recommendation about how to do it, or what might constitute completion of that work. I think Jason recognizes as well that it's not really what we need to be able to go a lot further on this.
Yeah.
So that's something that
if we could have a conversation to like narrow it down so that they don't think it's this huge burden, but
right.
with a little bit of back and forth, the two sides figure out what actually would they'd
Mhm.
be able to do efficiently without taking more than a an afternoon off or something like
Yeah.
that, that would be of most use to us.
Yep.
And Gail,
Yes.
where did you put Concord Green on this chart, a pie chart?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where it goes. It's,
Just, you know, we have it, but we have it
yeah,
on.
I think you're the fiber in street, but not available.
I believe that's true.
Yeah, it is, yes, it is here on site, but trenching is required, whatever that.
Yeah.
category
Yeah,
is.
and there are within the blue section of the large slice there, not available section, there are more condos and more apartments, you know, it's not, anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's,
no, this is good.
But
Thanks.
it's a great summary. I think that adding the numbers was pretty useful.
yeah, and then I
Okay.
go into a little more detail later, you know, the equity analysis about, you know, what specifically the types of homes and, you know, what does the affordable housing look like? Do they have fiber, the multi-dwellings? And I did find that actually quite a few multi-dwelling units and apartments do have fiber. 500 condos, 850 apartments, and 19 of the 20 duplexes. So that was kind of surprised by that. So I'm not sure what's so special about those. What was it put in when they were being built? Was the landlord really enthusiastic? You know, I don't know, but it's not anyway.
Yeah,
Interesting.
Good to know.
yeah. And then you have this problem statement here, which I like.
Yeah. So yeah.
And I did get the number, I believe it was 138 miles of roads.
Oh, okay, good.
I thought I forwarded that on. I just asked Jill.
Yeah, I saw the figure 100 earlier, so maybe we change that to 138.
Yeah, and not including Route 2, which I think is appropriate because, you know, Route 2 is not, I think there's maybe one house on Route 2. Okay, and I think that brings us to, and I'm going to do a time check here because it's about 10 after 8. So is everybody good for about another 15 or 20 minutes?
Yeah, closer to 15 would be better for me.
Okay, great.
Sorry,
I just want to be
on.
respectful. So this, I think, brings us to the section that Gordon worked on. And I think we did see this last week. I don't know whether, and again, I think some of it is, there is a little bit of overlap between these sections, which we'll have to think about how to pull out. Or maybe is this still your stuff, Gail?
Looked familiar to me.
I don't, let me see, hold on. Oh,
I didn't write this.
Okay.
hold on.
No, I wrote metrics, but
I had been working with a, that's not it.
Yeah, I think these were some notes that you would put at the very end of yours, Gail. That I think you were
Okay, yeah,
looking for homes for.
Right.
Right, okay. Good, and I think a lot of it is covered elsewhere. And then there's the placeholder for Scott's section on financials, which we're going to skip over. And then this is, Gordon, this is where your stuff starts. And I don't know what you want to do. I'll give you a minute, but so hopefully you recognize that heading.
oh yeah.
And I think you mostly were focused on this stuff starting on page 21, section 3. And I see
Yeah,
you
and
had
so
a bunch of notes.
I didn't actually start by intending to write in this section. The growth section is the next section down.
Okay,
But I was reviewing old minutes and found all these metrics that I didn't want to lose. I wanted to get them in, so I dropped them here, which is the reason I dropped them here is because that's where they already were.
right, okay.
At least some of them were. So
So we'll agree to where we're going to put the metrics and then consolidate all of that.
yeah.
Or,
Yeah, and you know, I'd say a couple of things. One is that when I'm editing and we've got change tracking on, it turns into a sea of red.
Yeah,
which I just find kind of, it's not bad right now. Maybe it's because you've chosen a different, markup setting.
yeah, I can, in fact, I usually try and do this, which is no
Okay,
markup.
all right,
And
maybe that's all I need to do.
so all of that is hidden now, and it just reads as though it was, yeah, you're right, it gets very busy.
It gets busy, and I'd go so far as to suggest that that before you distribute this the next time, Mark, that you go ahead and just accept all changes.
I'll be happy to do that.
Okay.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to take even this version that we're just looking at, and I'll just call it reviewed, and I'll just send it right back out to all of you, almost immediately. So
Okay.
you have something to reference.
Yeah. The other thing is that just I like bullet points and tables, and I found the work product with the definition of the take rate and stuff like that. I just don't really love it. It's too dense, and it just seems to me it could be presented in a little bit more a way that's a little friendlier to the eye. But
I think that it is actually in the next section down. So
Okay.
noted. Let's come back to that.
All right. I also included like little snippets from the original minutes. I think that may have been overkill. I mostly had them there for my own reference while I was typing.
Okay.
But it also is a nod to anybody else that I'm quoting, right? I'm not just pulling my quotes from the minutes. I'm pulling our conversations for the minutes. And so I'm was also kind of a way of expressing the idea that this is a group effort. So anyway, get rid of those. You can't see them now, so I guess it doesn't matter. Having said that, I think that a lot of this stuff is straight from the record, so it probably doesn't need a lot of detailed conversation. That there's existing metrics. I guess you could say that the financial reporting and controls that are in place now would fall into the category of existing records, existing metrics. Not sure if they clearly don't capture, like, say, for instance, the work that Scott's done in terms of, the payback time and so forth. So maybe that's something that the light plant could develop a methodology around to the extent that it's needed. It won't anyway. So
I apologize for jumping around. I tried to do something that obviously didn't work. I was just going to notice that this comment about Comcast paying a pile off is sort of factually incorrect. This is at the top of page 23.
Okay.
So Comcast pays, it's a franchise fee, which is a different thing.
All right, because it's a taxable entity, so it's not in lieu of, it is actually.
Yeah, it's a contractual fee that they have in fact agreed to pay, and it is for the privilege of being party to a non-exclusive license. It's,
Now, why did you capitalize and parenthesize that?
Just to make it, I could. So let's call it franchise fee, and somebody else with more knowledge even than I have can correct me if I'm not using the right, but it's definitely not a payment in lieu of franchise.
Right. And I'm borrowing here Carlin's wording. It may have been in the last meeting.
Yeah, right. And so there may be some other things about that we'll want to address, but I do think it's kind of germane, and it's actually, I believe it's specifically for the non-exclusive right for cable television. I'm not sure that the rest of those services are there, but anyway, that's.
Could you change? Could you get rid of that G in front of Concord? 2 characters to the left. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Okay. but I think that there's some value in discussing that. I think it is important to point out that the light plant already does pay a payment in lieu of taxes. It's based on its activities, and I would and I believe that's based on the capital plant value. And it's a good question of whether that includes the fiber plant or doesn't include the fiber plant. I'm noticing that Carlin has her hand up, so I assume that we'd love to hear from Carlin.
Just very briefly, thank you, Carlin Reed, 83 West End. On this very page you're on, Mark, that franchise fee is only for cable television service.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Good to know. And that makes a big difference because
It
that,
absolutely does. It's just for cable television. Just so happens that the other services can be provided over that same coaxial cable, including home security and telephone. But no, the franchise is just for cable TV.
Right. Which is why it's not directly comparable, because
You and I differ on that one. You and I differ on
Concord
that.
Light Broadband does
I
not
know,
provide
yeah,
cable
yeah, okay.
television services.
Anyway, I
Well,
just wanted to make sure the wording was done correctly. Thanks. That's
Thank
it.
wait, Carlin, you meant to say that you don't mind having the financial support from the telecom division?
I don't mind at all. I think it's appropriate. I think
Okay.
without it, I think the broadband is still a growth industry and the cable TV is not a growth industry. I think it is a small amount. And I think the broadband is represents a transfer of subscriptions that is occurring. We don't know how much, because some people may be going to just going to Comcast broadband, but some may be going to the town's broadband. And I think that if the town broadband did not exist, it's very possible that the cable TV subscription rate would not have dropped as much, because there would be no alternative. You folks being the broadband provide that competitive alternative. And frankly, my personal view is I want both industries to succeed. I'm trying to find the best way to do it so they can both do well. So that's my view.
I'll make this comment in response to that. For some years before Concord Light Broadband was available, I was an internet only subscriber to Comcast, and I'm betting that they didn't pay a pile off based on that, because they would have not counted me amongst their cable subscriptions and therefore not paid. So they could be cannibalizing their own business in that sense. Terry, I see you have your hand up too.
Yes, I was going to wait until public comment, but since you're already discussing it, I'm a big fan of keeping the pile off. And the reason is I'm a fiber customer, and I do watch the MSN PEG access meetings, and watched them when I was a Comcast customer a few years ago. And I feel that as a user who's benefiting from the service, I should pay for it. And I just think it's only fair that all the people that are watching the cable TV, government television should pay a portion of it.
Mhm.
And I have another comment about something else, and I'll wait until public comment.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm a fan of those services as well, and I actually think that everybody should pay for them. So I'd be
Right,
more
okay.
for put it in the general fund and have everybody pay for it through their property taxes or whatever the general fund is funded by. But that's my personal opinion. But we're going to have that discussion, and I think try and just discern where we come down on it. I think it's mostly important, to be completely open, that the rationale for why it exists be documented someplace, because it did kind of sneak up on people and hasn't really been, let's call it, vetted up until now. And I think once we all decide that we understand why it's there or not there, then we'll be good as a town. It's the way Concord does things.
May be fair to put a few words in that express some of these alternative views.
Yeah, I think so. So that'd be great to identify that. Do you want to keep on going with what's next in this section, Gordon?
Then JIS data points. I put in a screenshot. There was a lot of great stuff from the days that we worked with this, and
Yeah.
it might be, I think it'd be nice to get some of this into the report. And you know, what the takeaway to me is like, look, either staff or a light board looks at a map like that and it's got green and red in it, and you know, are we making progress? How
Mhm.
good, how close are we to universal access? I got to say that this map doesn't jump out at me as having a big problem. There are a few little spots of red. Also, the ability to compare, you know, what progress has happened between one point in time and another. Any way that they could do that would be great.
Yeah,
So,
I agree.
and then, you know, the idea of overlays, and I'm sure that staff, if they're not, may not have a lot of time for just, you know, responding to random requests, particularly if nobody's going to use the data. But, you know, hey, overlays, where are the places that are missing? Where are the places that are needed? What characteristics do they have? Are there above, you know, aerial wires? You
Mhm.
put that onto that map, you could identify places where installations can occur, maybe in different times of year and maybe at lower cost, break some of the bottlenecks that we have in bringing down the backlog. So anyway, that's what that GIS section's about.
Okay, great. Yeah, and then you get into the growth areas stuff.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm not sure exactly where I'm going to pull those unknown numbers out of a hat, though. Maybe it's almost 1,600 subscribers now, right?
Yeah, I mean, we can ask for them specifically. And I have to admit that I haven't really, you know, done a search on XXX to try to find out all the stats that are needed, but I'm
And
happy
I
to.
also should say that if we're looking to break, this is not new material. We actually have reviewed this as a group.
Right, okay. And I'm gonna take that opportunity. So this recommendation section, which I kind of appended onto here, includes a lot of what we also talked about, I think it was 2 or 3 meetings ago. And I had generally formatted it into bullet points mostly around here. And I think that, you know, the metrics, for example, and these are some of the same numbers that we were, you know, what's the parcel served? What's the served rate? What are the road miles? And I have that data, but didn't reach in here to update it. So, and then the take rate metric, and so churn, installations, and some of those measures associated with that. And then I think the governance section still needs work for anybody who wants, you know, feels like they don't have enough to do yet. And that, I think, that's mostly pointing at decisions that could be made, like, should we be offering different services than we already do? By the way, we do already offer dark fiber leasing and virtual private networks and things like that, that, you know, are a little, and some of the other things that are possible. We probably need to come back to, are we going to set some goals for business return and those kinds of things? So that was alluded to. So, and then some other things that I think were better covered elsewhere. So let's see. Oh, I like the fact that you decided to give us a bio, Gordon. Kept that.
It was from the first day.
Okay,
Yeah, so
great.
these are people's own words about
Yeah.
themselves.
Great. And then this request for Arbor reimbursement, which we reviewed in detail last week, is just carried in here because I figured it fits into recommendations that request be made. And then David, you had worked on this section about the multi-dwelling units and HOA.
Right. You want to go over it?
Is there anything you'd like to say about it?
I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty short, actually. Again, I look for anybody's input. I use several examples in town. And the only thing, Mark, I went back to your references on the generation of income. I only used 10 years rather than 20. I thought 20 was too long. Only because I didn't know how long a resident might be in a location. So I just used 10. And the landlords, excuse me. There may be more on landlords, but that's the one, if you can scroll down. Issues about landlords.
I'll tell you my primary reason for thinking in terms of 20 years or even 30 years, and that's because a piece of fiber, once installed, tends to last that long. There's a lot of people who are getting cable over a 50-year-old piece of coax in their house.
Right, I agree with that. I just didn't, I don't know,
Yeah,
I didn't know if it's, you know, if I have broadband here in my home, is someone going to come in and trigger the same broadband or just be happy with Comcast? So I just use the 10
Right.
years.
well, in communities that have multiple services, what usually ends up happening is every place gets wired with each of the service providers. And then as people switch around, each one of the service providers recognizes benefits from the fact that they've already been in that premise before.
Right.
But the asset lasts a long time. So there's different ways to think about it.
Right.
And Gail, I think I did forget to, this is the thing, I did forget to put in that broadband capital program. And when I did this last build, it was in the previous build. So I'll remember to do that. That got us to the bottom.
Wow, good job.
One comment, there's a lot of assumed growth rates that different sections have. And some of them are blank, some of them have numbers. We better be consistent about what we're assuming.
Mm-hmm.
There's a potential that the numbers won't match.
Yeah. Okay.
And a lot of potential for what the current base rate is, which we don't seem to know. We're assuming a certain number, but we don't seem to know that number.
I think there's probably two relevant growth rates. One is what's actually occurred in the past as you know, documented by how many subscribers the business has been reporting. And then the other is what's the capacity for growth. And the more I've thought about it, as I mentioned earlier in this meeting, the more I'm inclined to think that the capacity for growth is some kind of fixed number that's primarily driven by how much staff we have and how bad the weather is.
Yeah, but somewhere we talk about a 30% number, but then we talk about a growth number. And somewhere in that growth number, we're going to reach 30% pretty rapidly.
Yeah.
And is that the level off point
Yeah.
that we're going to use?
It's a very good point. Yeah. And I think that
I'm sorry.
I'm comfortable putting together some charts that try to sort of identify that in a visual form. I can already sort of see how that could come out.
I misstated that. We talk about 30% saturation, and then we talk
take rate.
It's I should have phrased that differently.
Yeah, I understood what you were saying. You were talking about the take rate getting to 30% and then leveling off at that point.
Right, and then they talk about growth rate, which may exceed that quite rapidly.
Yeah, the growth curve is usually, you know, the typical business growth curve. It's flat for a while and it goes up fairly steeply, then it flattens out again. And we're somewhere on that steep, we should be somewhere on that steeper incline at the moment. The question is, how close to the top of the hill are we getting?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so we should weigh in on what the potential views of that are. And that
And also when you reach that flattening area, then there are a bunch of other things you can do.
Yeah.
Because for instance, I think that there's a case for many families to choose to actually get Comcast full bundle and our service.
Yeah.
But
to
the
Gail's
case
point,
doesn't need to be made right now because we're still growing. But you know, for resiliency and whoever knows what, you know, some of these things I was debating with some of you earlier about, you know, there's some reasons why things that you can do with this network that you couldn't do otherwise. So anyway, need to develop those ideas.
If there are 2,000 premises that don't have service at all yet, those represent, you know, getting fiber available to those premises represents some number of years of additional growth potential. It wouldn't be there if you don't build that fiber. Yeah. Okay. let's take a few comments. This is good work. Thank you all for the contributions that you're making and have made. And I think we're, there's an end in sight here. So Carlin, please.
Thanks. Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. I really like this report. I'm going to thoroughly enjoy reading it. Now, in this section, I noticed on page 36, David, I think that's your section. I just happened to see a quick calculation, and I'm wondering if the numbers are right. You say something about $79.99 for 10 years has a payoff of $799. I think you need to multiply that number by 12
Thank you
again.
very much. You're wrong.
And
That's
it
right.
comes out to about 9,600. So
Right.
that was one thing I
I
just
appreciate that.
flashed on. But
Thank
yeah.
you.
Anyway, I'm really looking forward to the report. It's going to be good. Thanks.
Thank you, Carlin. Terry.
So tremendous progress. This report's really coming together. And I just want to chat for a minute about your forum coming up on April 14th.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to announce it at the select board meeting and have you put something in about news and notices, because I think one of the goals is that you want to invite members of the public to hear your report and give input, right? Is
Yes.
that the purpose?
Yes.
Okay, so just a technicality, you have it listed somewhere as a public hearing. And this is something that I didn't really understand before. There's a difference between a public hearing and a public forum. A public
Okay.
is more, you're gonna have to advertise it in the newspaper at least 2 weeks in advance. There's regulatory requirements. I don't think that's what you're doing. You're doing a public forum where you want to get the input from the citizens.
Okay.
So I learned this the hard way when I was on a task force last year, and we use the wrong terminology.
Okay.
So I recommend you call it a public forum.
Thank you for that suggestion. I'm sure we'll take it.
Okay, so great job. Lots of work. Coming along very well. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. So, and that is already posted on the town calendar, and the details are there. And the expectation is that we will get the, have an available draft of this document posted on the task force's webpage, and probably attached to the agenda of that, or listed as a document under there, so that people can have an opportunity to read it. We're obviously not going to read them, 40 or 50 pages of stuff, but we'll try to summarize where the issues are and what our approach has been in, let's say 15 or 20 minutes and at most, and then leave it open for questions.
I regrettably will be missing that meeting because of a long-term family commitment, but I will watch the recording. I did look on the calendar to see whether you had it listed as a public forum or a public hearing. It doesn't say either one on the calendar. It just
Oh,
said
good.
it looks like a regular fiber meeting. It does.
Great.
The public would not know it's a special meeting looking at the website calendar right now.
So I'll work with town staff to try to figure out how to publicize it better.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else have any? Yes.
Mark, what time is the public forum?
It's going to be at 7 o'clock, 2 weeks from tonight.
Okay, I just got to put it on my calendar, which I did not do. Thank you.
And and I think just as a matter of mechanics, if we can plan to arrive, at least 15 minutes ahead of time just to get set up and microphones and whatever, it's going to be in the public hearing room, assuming that I think we're on a pretty good path so far with COVID at the moment. We'll see where we are in 2 weeks. I think that, should there become a problem, then it is already listed as hybrid. So we'll have people presumably on Zoom and be able to take questions and comments from there. And if we had to, we would just do the whole thing virtually. Okay.
I'll just as clerk, I'll just say, I didn't get everything written down, but I don't think it's necessarily worth going back and listening to the recordings and stuff, because it's really actually, it's been memorialized in the work that we've done in the document itself.
Yes. Okay. And I'll hit save as soon as we adjourn and send you guys a at least a marked up copy in the new Word document. But recognize that you can work within the files that you've been working on and just send me updates and I'll take them in as new. And I'm available for any kind of conversation that anybody wants to have about a section. If you have specific suggestions on how to reorganize it, make them on the abstract page or send a comment to the abstract page and we can rebuild the document from that way. So
Mark, did you make that mathematical correction on my?
No, but we can. One of the things we could do is we could pull in that value of a customer little table from the spreadsheet that I was working on.
Okay.
The other.
Even better.
If you want to,
That's better.
does the arithmetic for you.
They'll do 20 years.
Yeah, you can just put in whatever you want to assume the monthly rate is, and
Okay.
and it will tell you what their value is over time.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
I
Do I hear a
move we
motion
adjourn.
to adjourn?
I move.
David, thank you.
David moves to adjourn.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll
I wanna
second.
Thank you, Gail. And so discussion about adjourning, I don't think so. Gordon,
Aye.
Scott,
Aye.
David,
Aye.
Gail,
Aye.
and myself, I thank you so much. This is
Good night.
feeling good about this.